So yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks very much for the introduction, Lester. I'm going to be talking about what life is like at Marmalade, and specifically focusing on a design perspective of that. So I'm going to start by looking at some of the game design processes and tools that we use, and then looking at 4 secrets to making better games. So how many people here have some input into the design of the games that they work on? Cool, excellent. Right, so just to give you a bit of a background about me to begin with, I started off in the games industry in 2006 at EA as a scripter on Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Then I went to Lionhead and worked on Fable 2. Then went to Kuju, worked on a few different children's games, and then back to Lionhead as a designer to work on Milo and Kate and Fable the Journey. And to give you a bit of a background about Marmalade, we started off in 1998 as IdeaWorks. Then in 2010, I think it was, we changed the AirPlay SDK to be the Marmalade SDK. In 2011, we changed the studio name from IdeaWorks to Marmalade. And in 2013, we created Marmalade Game Studio, but we have been making games since way back in 1998, before it was cool to make mobile games. So these are some of the games that we've worked on, mobile versions of The Sims 2, Final Fantasy, Metal Gear Solid, Call of Duty, Lara Croft, and more recently we've worked on a lot of different Hasbro titles, such as The Littlest Pet Shop, Hasbro Arcade, and a variety of different Chromecast games, Scrabble being the one that you're going to be able to play at lunchtime and have a competition in. But as well as games that we've made ourselves, there's lots of games that have been made using the Marmalade SDK, such as Plants vs Zombies, Cut the Rope, Goddess, Doodle Jump, Peggle, and Draw Something. So let's take a look at the different game design processes and tools that we use. One thing I like to do when I'm starting a project is to take a look at all the different constraints, because constraints when you're making a game can actually help foster creativity, and looking at the kind of limitations of your platform, the screens, what the actual control interface is going to affect a lot of your design decisions. So if you're working for a mobile game or working on something for Kinect or Chromecast, it's all going to have a big impact on the development. Quite often on our projects we like to have a big team brainstorm at the start. If you can get all the people who are going to be involved with the project all working on it, it's probably the best way to do it, rather than just a whole bunch of designers. You want the programmers, the animators, the artists, all the people who are going to be involved in actually creating the game to have buy-in right from the beginning, and then they can ask questions or raise good ideas right from the start. When we're doing that, we often have a whiteboard that we're just putting all the ideas up onto, and you kind of want to be really inclusive of everything at the moment. Kind of don't be shooting down ideas, just put everything you can on the board, and even if things might not work for whatever reason, it's good not to focus on that and to just keep churning on ideas, keep the flow going. Then at the end of it you can figure out what the best few ideas are. On Hasbro Arcade we tend to pick the 5 best ones and then write up a sort of a 1-page concept document for each of those, which we then send to Hasbro. They give us feedback on it and choose which of the concepts they want to move forwards on. At that point we then start taking a look at writing up a design document. Personally, I quite like writing something fairly minimal, just a couple of pages long, with a lot of different visual screenshots and sort of ways to communicate the different ideas. So yeah, I find minimal works quite well, but I know on a lot of big games a big design document can work quite well, and it's good to have everything up front. Although often being kind of agile can help on any project really, and having a lot of the design details get figured out as you go, because often it's all well and good to kind of write a bunch of stuff in a design document, but that's all it is to begin with, and you only really learn about the experience when you start actually making it. Some of the tools we use are Google Docs. It's really good for collaborating online, having lots of people all sort of editing at once and adding comments and feedback. And it's also really handy because you've got a detailed revision history of all the changes that are made to it. So if you ever need to jump back and see when something came in or how something changed, you can do that. Like lots of companies, we use analytics in our games to help tell us how people are playing them. At first, we ended up sort of trying to put in all the analytics we could. We thought, you know, all information is good. We want to know as much stuff as possible. But then it was kind of a lot of things to implement, and actually we found we often weren't using most of it. So it works much better to just try and figure out which questions you want to answer about your game and your users, and then just design your analytics around that to help you answer those questions. We also use Trello to help manage our teams and projects. It's like a web-based tool, so you can have a lot of different lists, and you create tasks and you can move them around the different lists and assign people to them, which is a very handy way of working, especially if you're using Agile development, which I'll talk about in a second. And I think one of the most valuable tools in game development is a trusty notepad, because I often find I'm a lot more creative when I'm just writing stuff down with pen and paper, drawing things out, and yeah, I think ideas flow a lot easier that way rather than staring at a blank screen. Often, I know lots of programmers like to write things out before they actually start to code as well, which I think is probably one of the best ways of doing it, so you're designing things up front rather than just doing it as you go. At Developer a couple of years ago, Dave Perry gave an excellent talk about the development of Earthworm Jim, and he was saying how they forced everyone on the team to, whenever they had an idea, to draw it out to explain it to people, which worked well for a few good reasons. It was handy because it helped sort of foster creativity amongst the team. Like when you see someone drawing something, it can often spark off a completely different idea in the person they're explaining it to. It's also good because it makes the idea a lot clearer when you've drawn it out on paper. It's a lot easier to understand. And finally, he said it was excellent because it just provided them all with a really good laugh at everyone's rubbish drawings. So when using Agile, I know all teams really use it in a slightly different way, and there's probably no perfect method that suits every company and every team. So yeah, this is kind of how we do it, but I know, yeah, it varies a lot. We use Scrum, so like I said, we have Trello, we have daily stand-ups that everyone stands around a TV, and we can add new tasks, move things around, check things off on checklists and see how everything's progressing. It's then good for each team member to just give a bit of an update on what they did yesterday, what their plans are for today, and anything that's blocking them. Because then sort of everyone can all hear what's going on, and quite often someone might be able to help with a problem that someone else is having really easily. Then, yeah, we just use this methodology for having lots of different milestones and knowing exactly where we are as we work towards them. The 4 secrets to making better games then, I'm just going to list them out here and then look at each one in a bit more detail. To begin with is identifying the experience, like figuring out what it is that you actually want to make. Then next is prototyping, so does it actually work? Is it the right idea? Then user testing, making sure you're on track and that your users are actually the people that you thought they were, and that their wants and needs are like you expect. Then there's the polishing, making your game as good as you actually can. So to start with, for identifying the experience, you need to ask yourself what it is that you want to make. Do you want to make a pure gameplay experience? Do you want to make a puzzle game, something with a story, something educational? So really the question is, what do you want your players to feel? What do you want the experience to be? Next, it's good to think about why it is that you're making this game. Do you want to make loads of money? Do you want critical acclaim? Do you want to teach people things? These are all valid reasons for making a game, but it's just good to be honest with yourself, because this is going to affect a lot of the design decisions that you make during development. Next, you want to look at who it is that you're aiming the game at. How old are your audience? What sort of areas do they live in? How do they obtain their games? What platforms do they use? Then, in this day and age, especially with more platforms and marketplaces than ever, and all being more saturated than ever, you need to think about how your game is going to stand out from the crowd, what's going to differentiate it. Sometimes looking at your game and the ones that are similar can help you identify how you might be able to differentiate yourself as well. Next phase is prototyping. There's loads of great tools out there. Sometimes you use GameMaker and Construct 2 because they're visual and let you drag and drop things and really easily just get something up and working before you even have to invest any time in coding something. But like I say, there's loads of different tools out there, so whatever suits you and your team. I quite like using InVision as well. It's more a kind of web-based tool for apps and websites, but it can be really handy for even prototyping the menus of your game, which is something that kind of often doesn't get created until you're actually making the final thing. But I often find the flow through the menus can be something that ends up being iterated on quite a bit. And so using a tool like this to get it right up front so you can just show someone a working version that they can implement can be a good way of doing things. But the key element for this section is just doing something fast, making sure you're figuring out what the problems are and answering them up front, and that you know what your plan is. Yeah, personally, I think just hacking stuff together as quickly as possible, or even using things like paper prototyping or something visual that doesn't even require coding can be good. Although there are lots of different approaches to this. Sometimes prototyping single modules but developing them sort of correctly and at the right pace can be a good way of doing things, because you might decide you want to prototype your camera system and you do that in isolation and you get that working perfectly. Then when you come to making the actual game, you can just drop that in and it will be done straight away. Quite often when we come to the stage and finish our prototype, we then start on the final version, but there might be other features that you want to add into the game, so you will often go back to the prototype and test these out so you're not wasting programming time on the final version when there might be a bit of iteration to be done. And quite often actually we end up with, if the prototype was created in a certain tool, you might find that things work slightly differently to in the final version, and often the final version is much better, but every now and then there'll be something that works a bit smoother or looks really nice in the prototype, so then you can look back at it and say, what was it that is different between that and the final version, and how is it that we can make the final version work that well, if not better? Another great tool for prototyping is game jams. Lots of companies these days do internal game jams, and we've had some at Marmalade before. They're excellent for helping to foster creativity, for making people realise how much they can get done in a short space of time. It can be really motivational to figure out what you can get done in just a couple of days. They're also excellent for learning, because working with different people, different tools, maybe doing a different area to what you're used to will help teach you a whole slew of different things. And it's also excellent for fostering teamwork, and if not, at least making you realise how important teamwork is. The next stage is user testing. So you want to test early and test often, as probably we all know, but often don't end up doing for a number of reasons that I'll look at in a moment. So why is it so important? Well, firstly, there is communication. You might have a tutorial in your game that you think is teaching people how to play the game, but actually when you put it in front of people, it's just confusing and it's not doing its job. You might have GUI elements for your HUD that actually no one knows what they even mean, and user testing will help you figure out all these things early enough to change them. It's also excellent for helping you balance your game. Maybe it's so easy everyone's bored and doesn't want to play it. Maybe it's so difficult it gets frustrating, so they put it down. User testing is also excellent for helping you find the fun in the experience. quite often it might not be where you thought it was. The thing you thought was your killer feature, people might not actually enjoy that much, and maybe there's another element of the game that is actually much more fun that you didn't even expect would be. So then you might want to turn your focus onto that. But they can also be excellent for generating ideas. Quite often when people are playing the game, they might try and do something that you hadn't planned for. You might see that happen a few times, so then you realise, actually, if I put something in that caters to that, so when people do that thing, the game responds, that could be a really nice moment. Or people might just suggest things to you as they're playing the game, and if you put it in front of enough people, you're bound to get a lot of good ideas coming through. It's also really handy for identifying your audience and figuring out if they are actually who you thought they were. Maybe you were targeting a certain demographic and actually they're not so keen on the game, but this other demographic really love it, so maybe you should switch your focus to that. So why do people often not end up doing user testing? Well, I guess one of the main reasons is time. Often feels like you don't have enough time, but actually, like in life, if you prioritize something, you can often make time for it. And yeah, it's just realizing how important it is and how it doesn't need to take up loads of time. You could just grab a few people off the street, grab some friends and family, and get the game in front of them and still learn lots of valuable insights. Next thing kind of tied into that is budget. Again, though, it doesn't have to be massive and expensive. Yeah, if you're testing on friends and family or just people who are eager to play a game, then you can still get some really valuable insights out of it. So how do you go about doing your user testing? Well, you don't want to test on the usual suspects. You don't want your test team, you don't want your developers, you want people who are fresh to the experience. You want to observe them, see, look at their expressions, what bits are they enjoying, what bits are they struggling with, and also asking them to think aloud is really helpful because there's only so much that you can observe, whereas when people are explaining to you what they're thinking and feeling and trying to do as they're playing the game, it can be really helpful. You want to ask lots of questions as well. You probably want to keep these for the end because you don't want them to be leading or sort of affecting their experience. And then write everything down. This user testing is going to teach you a lot of useful stuff about your game. You're not going to be able to remember all of it, so make sure you've got a record of it. Then you can pick the top 3, top 5, top 10 issues, fix them, and then iterate and try some more tests later on. So the final section is polish, looking at what you can do to take your game from a good game to a great game. There's this excellent talk, I think from the Nordic Game Conference, Juice It or Lose It. They're talking about a simple breakout clone and the things that they added just as a test to see how they can make it juicy, which is being entertaining, visually appealing, and just the little touches that take something up to that next level of the experience. So they sort of added different effects on the paddle and the balls as they go around. They added sort of a cheering audio as you take out a brick, and a whole bunch of different sort of really small just visual and audio touches to it that make a big difference. So looking at your game and seeing what sort of things you can add to it to improve it like that will make a big difference. Yeah, it's good to have the time to squash the final bugs at the end of the project and also to do some more of that all-important user testing. So to summarize, there's a whole bunch of different tools and techniques and processes that you can use. I've given you a quick overview of some of ours, but picking whatever ones work well for your team and project is key. And then the ways to make better games that we've looked at are identifying the experience, prototyping, user testing, and polishing. If you're interested in reading up any more on game design, I would recommend A Theory of Fun by Rafe Koster. It's an excellent book for anyone, whether they work in games or not. And also Jesse Schell's The Art of Game Design, A Book of Lenses, which is probably the best game design book I've ever read, which goes into an extraordinary amount of detail and analysis. And yeah, it's well worth a read. Any questions?
What's your favourite game that you worked on?
That I've worked on? Probably, working on local multiplayer games is actually really good fun, and one of the elements of that, I guess, is because as a designer, you give people some rules, but then a lot of the fun just comes from them and their friends. So working on Scrabble on Chromecast was actually pretty good fun, and seeing the test team playing on it over and over again, like above and beyond the Call of Duty, was really good. So yeah, hopefully you can all have a go on that, and we'll like it as much as they did.
So it sounds to me like Marcus laid down the challenge to beat him over lunch on the Scrabble challenge.
Harvey's actually excellent at Scrabble, so anyone who can beat him, I doff my hat to them. I think he was probably best in the whole studio.
So beat you first, then you get a chance to challenge Harvey.
Sure, yeah, the boss.
Okay, well, let's move on. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.